want to particularly thank Susan Crawford. This panel wouldn't have happened were it not for not just the conversations and meetings she put together for us late last year, but I think the work that Susan's been leading for the last several years in thinking critically about the internet and its potential and how it can best be rolled out at the city level. I thought Shireen's closing point that, I think there's been a lot of kind of insider-outsider tension through some of the discussions we've been having today and through some of the discussions we've been having for the last year. And Shireen's attempt at the very end to say, we're in this together, local government is an ally, I think is particularly relevant today when so many of us are aware that public distrust of institutions across the board, with the perhaps the only exception being institutions like the one we're in today, being so high, and local governments now finding themselves in the unique place of being government, but also being trying to serve citizen needs and residents' needs in a whole different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly you see some opportunities for those bridges and opening doors that you need to kind of see. One of the other closing comments was, if there's one word to describe this, it's balance. I guess my word, which is maybe a little bit more worrisome still take coming out of this, we started decided for optimists or pessimists, and I kind of gone back and forth all day, is that there are some very real tensions in that, and they're tensions that we're having to make decisions on in real time. And so I think it was Shireen saying it in the last piece, once you make those decisions for the vendors to hold your data, it's hard to roll that back. And so there are kind of tensions that we're deciding between civic value and efficiency and privacy, between control over our own data and convenience, many decisions that we're making in real time where there are tensions. And I think keeping that in mind, we are at the beginning of a conversation and a wave where being honest about the things that are going to be hard and not just saying, by the right dialogue, we can easily solve them, is another part of this process. Because I think I was just talking to Mark a little bit at the end, and I wish we'd gotten into that on the panel, that, his comment really was, it's a lot more complicated than that in some ways. I mean, it was a longer conversation than that. So I'm kind of coming a little bit hopeful from comments like this, but also really feeling like there's a lot more complicated stuff for us to dig in, but we've started a lot of the right conversations. I will stand by what I said on the president's panel, though, that a key to me in it is understanding and to a degree sort of blowing this up in people's minds to the point that we can have those conversations with a much bigger group of people. This is a tiny room. The NetGain conversation is a tiny conversation. The set of people working on cities is a tiny conversation. The set of people working on internet activism and thinking about privacy and security is a tiny conversation. We really need to grow into a much bigger conversation across society, as the internet becomes the environment that we live in.
Amen. Yeah, I think that's a common thread running through. So with that in mind, in terms of growing and broadening the conversation, we wanted to make sure you guys are part of, as we close this chapter of the conversation, before turning back to drinks in the back. So we really do, especially those of you who haven't had a mic yet, we really would love to hear you share. Maybe there's something that you're thinking about that you weren't thinking about when you came in. Maybe there's something you're thinking about doing when you walk out of here that you weren't thinking of before you came in. And I know about half of you by name, so I can't start poking on folks like Elena. Yeah. Our go-to volunteer right here, Peter, yeah.
One of the things that kept, I don't need that. One of the things that kept resonating for me was the clause in my rent, in my lease with my landlord that says, rent is due on the 5th day. And we think a lot bigger about the dangers of IoT, but the fact that I could be coming home with my daughter in my hand, a bag of groceries, and I'm late for any number of reasons, and the door isn't open as a renter has just been in my head. And it's a different level of fear and of woe than I had going into today. It seems obvious, but it was a new way to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. Scary and banal.
Thanks. Bruce Lincoln of Silicon Harlem. One of the comments that was made in the last panel equated the need of the underprivileged with that of being served by Wi-Fi, and that's not the case whatsoever. Because the underprivileged communities are historically underserved from the infrastructure standpoint, actually it needs to be reversed. It's those very communities where we have to put in place the next generation internet. Wi-Fi is one part of that, but also the gigabit infrastructure is another part of that. And then tied into that is all the kinds of services that they need from a humanistic standpoint, not simply surveillance or this idea that when you walk out of your home, you want to have the information over your smartphone as to whether or not you're going to get shot, because that's not really the case in these underserved communities. But it has to be a level of equity and humanism applied to how these services get deployed. And that really resonated a lot with what Joshua had to say in terms of how Boston is thinking about all of this.
Awesome. Is there anybody at the back? We've got the microphones are wireless and can go beyond the back of the cameras.
Our former philanthropy colleague, Elena, is raising her hand. So, and I should say, I
Can you
should
get a
give
mic there?
Elena, Elena, we had early conversations with Elena, and she really helped formulate a lot of the pathways we ended up going on. So no pressure, but we're counting you to close us out as well as you helped us start.
No, it's just more of a comment that I was happy. Elena Harkness, I'm with the Brookings Institution now, and do a lot of research on cities and governance issues, but I heard a number of times on all the different panels, people call out the importance of intermediaries that can structure this conversation, just as this conference, this Net Gain initiative is, and it just strikes me how important that's going to be over the long term. I've talked to folks here today that represent universities, organizing groups, human rights groups, people that are on the very highly technical side of things, and I just think we have to think about that infrastructure. I think Darren said this earlier, for the long term. This is going to be a long-term problem. So I just want to, kudos to the organizers for pulling together people representing each of the sectors that I think need to be at the table. But let's think about if we have the right intermediaries in place to sustain this kind of conversation and really work together to get there. Thanks, guys.
And we don't yet, so it's a good thing to call out, for sure. We have a couple more comments, and then we'll maybe wrap and continue the more important strategic intermediary building, which is drinking.
Nobody from the back group? We didn't get anyone from anything from the laptop crowd in the back?
I think there was one hand up there.
And I have the mic.
Go, Georgia.
I'm Georgia from the Open Technology Institute, Georgia Bullen. One of the things that has struck me in the last week, I was driving over the holiday weekend and listening to Reply All from Gimlet, and they added a new feature on whether or not you should be angry about the things that you're reading about online, and they focused on the broadband privacy decision for their first one. And they ended up deciding to make it a 4 out of 10, as in not something you should worry about. And what struck me was the two hosts for the podcast are relatively privileged technology writers telling everyone they don't need to worry about that. And I was like, okay, we're clearly not, with the conversations we're having here, we're still not fostering enough larger conversation about what the impact of that really is, what the impact of these problems are for the more impoverished communities, for low-resourced communities, and how do we start to change that? And so thinking about it from within the tech media conversation, like we all know each other and talk to each other. I think we're still not necessarily getting out to the communities that are really hurt by these things, and we're definitely not reaching the tech community yet. So just food for thought.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was great to hear from the people who are in the organizations and foundations that are part of NetGains, and to the technologists and from the cities. It's important, though, that this isn't an Internet of Things conference. This is about the public interest and funding public interest technology. And with the Internet of Things, who's going to be looking out for human rights, digital rights, marginalized communities? If not NetGains and the people in this room, it's not going to come from the commercial sector. So people who work for municipalities and towns and villages, it's important when you make technology decisions to think about, again, that after effect next year, 5 years, 10 years from now, because you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle. Just want to stress that. Thank you.
Wait, Matt, you use toothpaste from a bottle? But I think you're right. And this is the seed. I totally applaud that spirit and appreciate that comment. This is the seed of who's got to take care of that stuff. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say as a last wrap up, for folks who might not be familiar, there are some amazing programs and initiatives that are here in the room doing incredible work that I think could give us a point of inspiration to lead from. So I'm going to put some colleagues on the spot. But if you don't know about it yet, please take a moment to look into ranking digital rights, something that'll speak to and support some of the earlier conversations with regard to what we need to know and how we support it. Greta, you can say more. But more importantly, I want folks to know, particularly who are interested in community engagement strategies that are led by, fostered by, supported by, and are sustained by communities most affected, is in New York, the RISE program, which is in effect a digital stewards program where young people are trained along with community members to engage in localizing mesh nets, right? So it's not just the internet, it's about internets and how communities can then own them and shepherd them. So for their, since they weren't in the room with us today, but they're very much affected by this from resiliency to education to workforce, please take a moment to find out more. Can I pass it to you and put you on the spot? Okay.
Thank you, Megan. Hi, I'm with New America's Resilient Communities program, and as Megan was saying, we work with residents in 6 Sandy-impacted New York City communities to co-design and build mesh wireless networks that are really like local internet projects, so really helping people understand how their engagement works locally. And Megan also mentioned Rebecca McKinnon's fantastic Ranking Digital Rights project, which really has created an entire methodology around corporate accountability and human rights in technology. So I would absolutely recommend folks take a look at that.
Awesome. All right.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to mention that, NetGain doesn't stop here. The projects you'll hear about are, Andrew, did I see a hand up in the back? I was shocked how quiet and reticent you were. I thought maybe, you had a cold or something.
So if those of you who don't know, Personal Democracy Forum is coming up June 8th and 9th, and anybody who's registered here would be happy to extend a deep, deep discount because, as John's about to say, the conversation that is happening here is continuing in other places, and we bring together about 1,000 people from around the country and parts of the world. And a lot of the same topics are going to be brought up there, and we're going to expand the community as much as possible. It's June 8th and 9th. And if you need any information, you can find me or reach out to John or anybody from the Knight Foundation. Thank you.
And what I was going to say is, in addition to that, the next iteration of NetGain that we're going to start on Monday taking on is around what we're calling the quantified society. The ways, still overlaps a lot, obviously, with what we've been talking about today. The ways in which data, intentionally, often unintentionally, with our awareness, often without our awareness, is driving the way our lives are being impacted. And if you want to get a little sneak preview, our colleague Chance Williams from the Open Societies Foundation is in the back, way back corner there. He, along with MacArthur Foundation and his colleagues, Susan Morgan, who's here too, are taking the lead on that. So we're excited to see where that goes. For our part, I really want to thank Lauren and Susan from the Knight Foundation team, who got here a little bit before 6 a.m. to set up and moved with us today as we move things around. I especially want to thank Alana Berkowitz, who I think is still here, just saw her. Alana was part of this journey for us and really helped get the ball rolling in a lot of these conversations. And thank you so much to the library staff and all the folks who have run this today for us.
And then I also want to thank on the Mozilla side, An-Mei Chung, who's one of our senior fellows, has been driving this whole kind of work around NetGain, as well as Michelle Thorne and John Rogers, who've been as part of our IoT kind of, I want to say research group, but really kind of crazy activist fuck up the world group. If you haven't met John, introduce yourself over the course of the cocktails. But really an amazing team, the night and the Mozilla people working together. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to all the staff here at the library for pulling this together.
Yep. And thank you all for just adding so much value to the conversation. I, for one, am more excited to see what comes out of this today than I was walking in this morning. But meanwhile, please stay and keep talking. I will no longer provoke you to stop the conversations. We can have them for a while. There's wine and I think beer in the back room. So please hang out.
And they're not going to kick us out. So
eventually.